Page 270 continued. Thomas Carlyle, 1795 to 1881, para. In marked contrast with Macaulay, the brilliant and cheerful essayist, is Thomas Carlyle, the prophet and censor of the 19th century. Macaulay is the practical man of affairs, helping and rejoicing in the progress of his beloved England. Carlyle lives apart from all practical interests, looks and distrust on the progress of his age, and tells men that truth, justice, and immortality are the only worthy objects of human endeavor. Macaulay is delighted with material comforts. He is most at home in brilliant and fashionable company, and he writes even when ill and suffering with unfailing hopefulness and good nature. Carlyle is like a Hebrew prophet just in from the desert, and the burden of his message is, quote, "Woe to them, W-O-E, that are at ease in Zion, Z-I-O-N, exclamation, unquote." Both men are, in different ways, typical of the century and somewhere between the two extremes. The practical, helpful activity of Macaulay and the spiritual agony and conflict of Carlyle, we shall find the measure of an age which has left the deepest impress upon our own. Para. Works of Carlyle. There are two widely different judgments of Carlyle as a man and a writer. The first, which is founded largely on his minor writings like Chartism, C-H-E-R-T-I-S-M, latter-day pamphlets, and S-H-O shooting, S-H-O-O-T-I-N-G, Niagara, N-I-A-G-A-R-A, shooting Niagara, declares that he is a misanthrope and dyspeptic with a barbarous style of writing, that he denounces progress, democracy, science, America, Darwin, everybody and everything that he does not understand, that his literary opinions are largely prejudices, that he began as a prophet and ended as a scold, S-C-O-L-D, semicolon, page 271, and that in denouncing shams of every sort, he was something of a sham himself, since his practice was not in accord with his own preaching. The second judgment, which is founded upon heroes and hero worship, hero and hero worship, Cromwell, and Sartor, S-A-R-T-O-R, Resatus, R-E-S-A-R-T-U-S, declares that these works are the supreme manifestation of genius, that their rugged, picturesque style makes others look feeble or colorless by comparison, and that the author is the greatest teacher, leader, and prophet of the 19th century. Para. Somewhere between these two extremes will be found the truth about Carlyle. We only note here that while there are some grounds for the first unfavorable criticism, we are to judge an author by his best rather than by his worst work, and that a man's aims as well as his accomplishments must be taken into consideration. As it is written, quote, "Whereas it was in thine heart to build an house unto my name, thou didst well that it was in thine heart," unquote. Whatever the defects of Carlyle and his work, in his heart he was always planning a house or temple to the God of truth and justice. Para. Carlyle's important works may be divided into three general classes: critical and literary essays, historical works, and Sartor Resartus, the last being in a class by itself, since there is nothing like it in literature. To these should be added a biography, The Admirable Life of John Sterling, and Carlyle's Letters and Reminiscences, which are more interesting and suggestive than some of his better-known works. We omit here all consideration of translations and his intemperate denunciations of men and institutions in Chartism, Chartism, Latter-day pamphlets and other essays which add nothing to the author's fame or influence. Para. Of the essays, which are all characterized by Carlyle's zeal to get at the heart of things and to reveal the soul rather than the works of a writer, the best are those on quote, Burns, unquote, quote, Scott, unquote, quote, Novalis, Novalis, unquote, quote, Goethe, unquote, quote, Characteristics, unquote, quote, Signs of the Times, unquote, and quote, Boswell's Life of Johnson, stop, unquote. In the famous essay on Burns, which is generally selected for special study, we note 4 significant things. 1. Carlyle is peculiarly well fitted for his task, having many points in common with his hero. 2. In most of his work, Carlyle, by his style and mannerisms and positive opinions, generally attracts our attention away from this subject. But in this essay he shows himself capable of forgetting himself for a moment. To an unusual extent he sticks to his subject and makes us think of Burns rather than of Carlyle. The style, though unpolished, is fairly simple and readable and is free from the breaks, crudities, ejaculations and general, quote, nodulosities, unquote, nodulosities, which disfigure much of his work. 3. Carlyle has an original and interesting theory of biography and criticism. The object of criticism is to show the man himself, his aims, ideals, and outlook on the universe. The object of biography is, quote, to show what and how produced was the effect of society upon him, semicolon. What and how produced was his effect on society, stop, unquote. 4. Carlyle is often severe, even harsh, in his estimates of other men, but in this case the tragedy of Burns, quote, Life of Fragments, unquote, attracts and softens him. He grows enthusiastic and, a rare thing for Carlyle, apologizes for his enthusiasm in the striking sentence, quote, we love Burns, capital B, small urns, and we pity him, semicolon, and love and pity are prone to magnify, stop, unquote. So he gives us the most tender and appreciative of his essays, and one of the most illuminating criticism of Burns that has appeared in our language. Para. The central idea of Carlyle's historical works is found in his Heroes and Hero Worship, 1841, his most widely read book. Quote, Universal history, unquote, he says, quote, is at bottom the history of the great men who have worked here, stop, unquote. To get at the truth of history, we must study not movements but men, and read not state papers but the biographies of heroes. His summary of history as presented in this work has 6 divisions. 1. The hero as divinity, having for its general subject Odin, Odin, the quote, type, Norseman, Norseman, unquote, who Carlyle thinks was some old heroic chief, afterwards deified by his countrymen. 2. The hero as prophet, treating of Mahomet and the rise of Islam. 3. The hero as poet, in which Dante and Shakespeare are taken as types. 4. The hero as priest or religious leader, in which Luther appears as the hero of the Reformation and Knox, Knox, as the hero of Puritanism. 5. The hero as man of letters, in which we have the curious choice of Johnson, Rousseau, and Burns. 6. The hero as king, in which Cromwell and Napoleon appear as the heroes of reform by revolution. Para. It is needless to say that Heroes is not a book of history, neither is it scientifically written in the manner of Gibbon. With science in any form, Carlyle had no patience, and he miscalculated the value of that patient search for facts and evidence which science undertakes before building any theories either of kings or cabbages. Page 272. The book, therefore, abounds in errors, but they are the errors of carelessness and perhaps of small consequence. His misconception of history, however, is more serious. With the modern idea of history as the growth of freedom among all classes, he has no sympathy. The progress of democracy was to him an evil thing, a, quote, turning of the face towards darkness and anarchy, unquote. At certain periods, according to Carlyle, God sends us geniuses, sometimes as priests or poets, sometimes as soldiers or statesmen, but in whatever guise they appear, these are our real rulers. He shows, moreover, that whenever such men appear, multitudes follow them, and that a man's following is a sure index of his heroism and kingship. Para. Whether we agree with Carlyle or not, we must accept for the moment his peculiar view of history, else Heroes can never open its treasures to us. The book abounds in startling ideas expressed with originality and power, and is pervaded throughout by an atmosphere of intense moral earnestness. The more we read it, the more we find to admire and to remember. Para. Carlyle's French Revolution 1837 is to be taken more seriously as a historical work. But here again his hero worship comes to the front, and his book is a series of flashlights thrown upon men in dramatic situations rather than a tracing of causes to their consequences. The very titles of his chapters, quote, Austria Redux, Astrea, Astraea, space, capital R-E, small e, D-U-X, quote, unquote, semicolon, quote, windbags, comma, unquote, quote, Broglie, B-R-O-G-L-I-E, the war god, unquote, do violence to our conception of history and are more suggestive of Carlyle's individualism than of French history. He is here the preacher rather than the historian. His text is the eternal justice, and his message is that all wrongdoing is inevitably followed by vengeance. His method is intensely dramatic. From a mass of historical details, he selects a few picturesque incidents and striking figures, and his vivid pictures of the storming of the Bastille, Bastille, the rush of the mob to Versailles, Versailles, the death of Louis XVI, and the Reign of Terror, seem like the work of an eyewitness describing some terrible catastrophe. At times, as it portrays Danton, Robespierre, and the great characters of the tragedy, Carlyle's work is suggestive of a historical play of Shakespeare. And again, as it describes the Russian riot of men led by elemental passion, it is more like a great prose epic. Though not a reliable history in any sense, it is one of the most dramatic and stirring narratives in our language. Para. Two other historical works deserve at least a passing notice. The history of Frederick, Frederick the Great, 1858 to 1865, in 6 volumes, is a colossal picture of the life and times of Cromwell, the hero of the Prussian Empire. Oliver Cromwell's Letters and Speeches is, in our personal judgment, Carlyle's best historical work. His idea is to present the very soul of the great Puritan leader. He gives us as of first importance Cromwell's own words and connects them by a commentary in which other men and events are described with vigor and vividness. Cromwell was one of Carlyle's greatest heroes, and in this case is most careful to present the facts which occasion his own enthusiasm. The result is, on the whole, the most lifelike picture of a great historical character that we possess. Other historians had heaped calumny, calumny, upon Cromwell till the English public regarded him with prejudice and horror, and it is an indication of Carlyle's power that by a single book of revolutionized England's opinion of one of her greatest men. Para. Carlyle's Sartor's 1834, his only creative work, is a mixture of philosophy and romance, of wisdom and nonsense, a chaotic jumble of the author's thoughts, feelings, and experiences during the first 35 years of his life. The title, which means, quote, the tailor, Tailor, patched up, comma, unquote, is taken from an old Scotch song. The hero is Diogenes Teufelsdrockh, Teufelsdrockh, a German professor at the University of Weissnicht II, Weissnichtwo, within bracket, don't know where. The narrative concerns this queer professor's life and opinions, and the central thought of the book is the philosophy of clothes, which are considered symbolically as the outward expression of spirit. Thus, man's body is the outward garment of his soul, and the universe is the visible garment of the invisible God. The arrangement of Sartor is clumsy and hard to follow. In order to leave himself free to bring in everything he thought about, Carlyle assumed the position of one who was translating and editing the old professor's manuscripts, which are supposed to consist of numerous sheets stuffed into 12 paper bags, each labeled with a sign of the zodiac. The editor pretends to make order out of this chaos, but he is free to jump from one subject to another and to state the most startling opinion by simply using quotation marks and adding a note that he is not responsible for Teufelsdrock's crazy notions, which are in reality Carlyle's own dreams and ideals. Page 273. Partly because of the matter, which is sometimes incoherent, partly because of the style, which, though picturesque, is sometimes confused and ungrammatical, Sartor is not easy reading. But it amply repays whatever time and study we give to it. Many of its passages are more like poetry than prose, and one cannot read such chapters as, quote, the everlasting no, comma, unquote, quote, the everlasting Yea, comma, unquote, quote, reminiscences, comma, unquote, and quote, natural super-naturalism, comma, unquote, and be quite the same man afterwards. For Carlyle's thought has entered into him, and he walks henceforth more gently, more reverently through the world as in the presence of the eternal. Para. General characteristics. Concerning Carlyle's style, there are almost as many opinions as there are readers. This is partly because he impresses different people in widely different ways, and partly because his expression varies greatly. At times he is calm, persuasive, grimly humorous, as if conversing. At other times wildly exclamatory, as if he was shouting and waving his arms at the reader. We have spoken of Macaulay's style as that of the finished orator, and we might reasonably speak of Carlyle's as that of the exhorter, who cares little for method so long as he makes a strong impression on his hearers. Quote, "Every sentence is alive to its fingertips, unquote," writes a modern critic, semicolon. And though Carlyle often violates the rules of grammar and rhetoric, we can well afford to let an original genius express his own intense conviction in his own vivid and picturesque way. Para. Carlyle's message may be summed up in two imperatives: labor and be sincere. He lectured and wrote chiefly for the upper classes who had begun to think somewhat sentimentally of the conditions of the laboring men of the world. And he demanded for the latter not charity or pity, but justice and honor. And labor, whether of head or hand, is divine. And labor alone justifies a man as a son of earth and heaven. To society which Carlyle thought to be occupied wholly with conventional affairs, he came with the stamp of sincerity, caning upon men to lay aside hypocrisy and to think and speak and live the truth. He had none of Addison's delicate satire and humor, and in his fury at what he thought was false, he was generally unsympathetic and often harsh. But we must not forget that Thackeray, who knew society much better than did Carlyle, gave a very unflattering picture of it in Vanity Fair and the Book of Snobs. Apparently the age needed plain speaking, and Carlyle furnished it in scripture measure. Harriet Martineau, Martineau, who knew the world for which Carlyle wrote, summed up his influence when she said that he had, quote, infused into the mind of the English nation sincerity, earnestness, healthfulness, and courage, stop, unquote. If we add to the above message Carlyle's conceptions of the world as governed by a God of justice who never forgets, and of human history as, quote, an inarticulate Bible, unquote, slowly revealing the divine purpose, we shall understand better the force of his ethical appeal and the profound influence he exercised on the moral and intellectual life of the past century.